Shuckalaka kapow. How's it going, old schoolers? You're kicking it old school with Russell JS, and I am your host, Russell JS. I was going to make this video yesterday, but, due to the content of it and the premise of it, unfortunately, I was bummed out about, what had happened. You see, the rock world, I'm wearing an appropriate t-shirt for it. The rock world is at a loss once again with the death of former Kiss lead guitarist and founding member of Kiss, Ace Frehley, who died at the age of 74 after having a terrible fall and internal bleeding in the brain. I mean, he was one of the one of the greatest hard rock guitarists. I mean, the man his influence was passed down to artists ranging from Dimebag Darrell to Slash to Scott Ian to Kirk Hammett. And I was preparing this one video in particular. It's going to be another album versus album, track by track. I'm going to put, I'm going to do an unplugged theme. I'm going to put Nirvana Unplugged New York. Nirvana Unplugged in New York versus Kiss Unplugged. Now, the thing is about the Unplugged show on MTV, and plus, by the way, I hear MTV is going to be pulling the plug as well. So, it was kind of dying off and going downhill for a while, with the reality shows and just focusing on one genre of music. But I want to get back to the thing. I was riding in the truck the other day, Friday night, and I received a text from a friend of mine who said Ace Frehley is dying. So I told him, hey, let me call you when I get done with work. I'll find out what's going on. And while I was in the truck, I was on my way to a customer's home. I was a helper, and I was going through the internet. He was still alive, but they said in critical condition, and the family's making the decision on whether or not to pull the plug because the condition was getting worse. So, that's all I had known. And I was like, I hope Ace gets through with this. I hope that everything will be all right. And then when I got in my car and I had Sirius XM going on Ozzy's Boneyard, it indicated Ace Frehley, 1953 to 2025. And they were playing a bunch of Kiss songs. And, you know, I I went to shock. I mean, it just felt dark. I mean, it felt dark and gloomy even during the day, and it was nice and sunny out here in Southwest Florida today, but it felt very gloomy and very glum. And I was going to do this video before I went to bed, but I fell out. I couldn't really get in the mood. So tonight, I want to dedicate this album versus album, track by track, to the memory of Paul Daniel Ace Frehley. Ace, may you take that rocket ride up to eternity and bring heaven into the New York groove. Once again, Nirvana Unplugged in New York versus Kiss Unplugged. And without further ado, well, let me go ahead and talk about this. This album actually, at the time, Kiss's popularity by the early 1990s, despite the fact Revenge was a good selling album and a great tour, they were kind of, their celebrity status was kind of going down. I mean, their popularity was waning. And Kiss, were doing stuff like conventions. There were Kiss tribute bands all over. And Gene and Paul were, doing the Kiss convention. And what had happened was they invited former drummer Peter Criss, who brought his daughter to the convention, so she could see what he helped, start. And they brought Peter Criss up on the stage to sing a few songs. I think they did Beth and they did Hard Luck Woman. And then they decided, hey, why don't we do an unplugged, do an MTV unplugged. They rehearsed, and the big surprise was in the middle of the show, Current Kiss members Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer exited the stage for a while when Paul announced we're bringing members of the family in. And Ace and Peter came up and they did a few songs together, and then they brought everybody out to finish off the show. And it was probably one of the best episodes of MTV Unplugged there was. So without further ado, let's see how these bad Oscars rank out, shall we? And if you're new to the channel, always remember to hit a like, subscribe, leave comments down in the box down below, and ring the bell for notifications for future videos. Now, in the case of MTV Unplugged, Nirvana versus Kiss. Now, there's 14 tracks on Nirvana Unplugged, and there's 15 on Kiss Unplugged. We'll see what happens in the end. But first, let's get on to the rankings, shall we? About a Girl versus Going Home. I easily have to go for Going Home. Written both by Paul Stanley and Ace Frehley. Come As You Are versus Plaster Caster. In many ways, this is kind of a hard choice to make. I love both songs. Come As You Are turned me on in wanting to be a guitar player. And Plaster Caster, it's just a good rocking tune. So you know what? I'm going to give them both a point. They're tied in that one. Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam versus Going Blind. Easily, I have to go with Going Blind because I don't know what that song really is about. I know it's a cover, but, I don't know what it's about. I don't know if it's sacrilege or if it's not, so Kiss gets the point there. The Man Who Sold the World versus Do You Love Me? Sure, The Man Who Sold the World is an old David Bowie cover. And Do You Love Me, it's original, but, I really am not a big fan of Do You Love Me because it's Paul Stanley sounding like he's boasting about himself. So I'm going to go ahead and give that to Nirvana. All right, let's see. Pennyroyal Tea versus Domino. Both are really good songs, but I love Domino way better. It's got a real good groove to it, and it's just a great sounding song. Dumb versus Sure Knows Something. I don't know what Kurt Cobain was thinking when he wrote that song. I'm not a big fan of it. Sure, it was a big hit, but I have to give it to Kiss. Polly versus A World Without Heroes. I do enjoy the song Polly. I love it very much. I love that acoustic guitar, especially in the Nevermind recordings. I do enjoy it. And I love... Oh, wait, hold on. No. Dumb versus Sure Knows Something. Again, you know what? I love Sure Knows Something. I was getting ahead of myself there. So I'm going to go ahead and give the point to Kiss. Okay, let's see. Polly versus A World Without Heroes. I love, like I was explaining, I do love Polly. I love that acoustic sound to it. It's kind of like a good folk rock, punk kind of fusion, if there's any such a thing. And I also love A World Without Heroes. You know what? Since I love them both, I'm going to give them each a point. On a Plane versus Rock Bottom. I love the guitar intro to Rock Bottom. I always have. It's a good rocking track. But, even unplugged, On a Plane is still a heavy hitter, so I have to give it to On a Plane. Something in the Way versus See You Tonight. Something in the Way, I can't understand exactly what Kurt Cobain is saying in the lyrics, although I've read it, and it sounds like, it's too depressing. So I'm going to go ahead and give it to See You Tonight. Plateau versus I Still Love You. That's just Paul Stanley writing about a girl that broke up with him, and I think I know the deal. He was in love with this actress named Donna, where her name is Donna Dixon. Really loved her, and at the time, they were dating, and he was about to buy an engagement ring for her, and she had starred in a movie with Dan Aykroyd at the time in 1982, and she ended up breaking it off with Paul Stanley to get with Dan Aykroyd. I wonder what it was Dan Aykroyd had that Paul Stanley didn't. I mean, as I'm a Kiss fan and I'm also a Dan Aykroyd fan because I can't say anything bad about either. And if you ever saw the movie Wayne's World, you might know Donna Dixon. She was that cute blonde that worked at the donut shop that Garth had a crush on, always fantasized about. So I have to go ahead and give that one to Nirvana. Oh Me versus Every Time I Look at You. Uh, it's one of those songs where, it's kind of, I don't know, I didn't really care for it. And you know what? Every Time I Look at You is a really great track, so I'm giving that one to Kiss. Lake of Fire versus 2000 Man. Oh, this is where Ace Frehley gets down jamming on this underrated great tune by the Rolling Stones, 2000 Man. And that is going up against Lake of Fire, and I love that song Lake of Fire even though it's a cover. I mean, you know what? I'm going to give them both a point for that. Okay. All Apologies versus Beth. Easily I'm going with Beth. I always loved that song, and Peter's vocals on it never disappoint. And now, number 14, Where Did You Sleep versus Nothing to Lose. I actually enjoyed this song, Where Did You Sleep? I mean, I've heard Nothing to Lose so many times. I mean, it's an okay song, but I think Kiss has done better. So I got to give that to Nirvana. And last but not least, since Nirvana Unplugged only had 14 tracks and Kiss 15, I'm going to say Blank Space versus Rock and Roll All Night. Not only do I love the alive version of Rock and Roll All Night better than the studio version, I also love this version as well, so I have to go with Rock and Roll All Night. And now, the end result, and Ace is probably looking down on me, so is Eric Carr, and they're both giving me the signature thumbs up. We got Nirvana with 8 points and Kiss with 12, so that means Kiss takes the win for this unplugged session. Now I know what you're thinking. Like I was gonna do something where there was gonna be an album that was gonna go up against this Ozzy era of Sabbath, and another tune, another album was gonna go up against Blizzard of Oz. But when Ozzy died, I didn't really have it to do it. So I've already got an album versus album, track by track ready to go against Blizzard of Oz. The next one I do, it's going to be Blizzard of Oz versus Ace Frehley, Frehley's Comet. And, I wanted to go ahead and make this video. I was getting ready to do it, for Friday, but unfortunately, I just fell in depression over what happened to Ace. And my condolences to Kiss, to Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, the colleagues of Kiss. Ace's friends and family and other colleagues. You know, my heart is my heart's with you all, and my heart's with Ozzy's family, friends, and colleagues. And I had to go ahead and do this video because it was do or don't do it, and I wanted to do this. I wanted to incorporate some unplugged CDs, and I'm getting a lot of other stuff ready. So, and also, I was down at my local public library this week looking to, check out some DVD movies. Here's one I want to recommend. It's an older movie, came out in 1978, but I recommend this because it's Mark Hamill's first movie after the original Star Wars, 1978's Corvette Summer. It's about a high school senior played by Mark Hamill named Kenny, who him and his friends, they go to a junkyard with their shop teacher to find an old wreck and restore it for a class. And Mark Hamill finds a trashed up 1973 Corvette Stingray that him and his friends, they go ahead and restore and modify and make it into this really cool looking machine. Pretty good for the 1970s. I looked at this movie, I saw it a long time ago, and I remember thinking, oh my God, at first I was like, oh my God, this is cheesy, this is corny, but it's fun. I mean, Mark Hamill went from Star Wars to this, but I think he was branching out. He wanted to expand his horizons other than being Luke Skywalker. And you know what? They do a really cool job. It's about a guy who modifies an old junked up Corvette, and he's driving it around. He's proud of himself with his friends. Then it gets stolen, and he goes on a trip from California to Las Vegas to retrieve his car. And I look at this movie, and I was watching it, and I thought to myself, I wouldn't be surprised if Tim Burton took inspiration from this movie to do Pee-wee's Big Adventure. If you remember Pee-wee's Big Adventure, where his prized possession bicycle gets stolen, he goes running across the country to look for it. I think it's similar to this movie. And I do suggest you go down to your local public library, you go on, see if you can find it on Netflix or any streaming services, or maybe buy a copy of this on eBay. It is a real fun movie to watch. And that is all the time I have. I'm starting to get really tired. It's looking at the clock right now. It's 1:44 a.m. on Saturday. And I do have a lot I got to do. But this is your old pal Russell JS reminding you to keep it real, keep it fresh, keep it chill, keep kicking it old school, watch old school movies, watch old school TV shows, play old school video games, listen to old school music. Get you enough of love, get you enough of peace, get you enough of tranquility, get you enough of less drama, less chaos, no chaos. And as always, I wish you Godspeed. May the force be with you always, and shuckalaka kapow.